Thank you all for joining the Sports Detroit webinar on CBD. We are looking at the criminalization of cannabis, the war on drugs, how it's impacted Black people, and what we can do now that marijuana is legal in Michigan to ensure that entrepreneurism goes up. So I want to thank all of the guests. So we've got a variety of experts on this area, people who have been activists, local entrepreneurs, policymakers. I'm so grateful for you all being here. So let's jump in. Our first question is just like around what the issue is.
Let's give the panelists a moment to introduce themselves.
Well, can we have them introduce themselves with the first question?
With the first question, yes, please.
Yep. Go ahead.
So let's have everyone introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Councilman James Tate. The first question is, since cannabis has been legalized, what's changed?
There we go. I am James Tate, a member of Detroit City Council, representing District 1, far northwest Detroit. And what has changed thus far is the fact that I know for sure our officers should not be arresting anyone who has 2.5 or less in terms of ounces of cannabis. The big piece that we definitely are doing, at least on my end, what's really changed is the fact that we're working on this ordinance to get approved for recreational marijuana in the city of Detroit. There's been a lot of thought being put into what this ordinance will look like, especially in the area of social equity. It has been delayed. I've taken a lot of heat as a result of that, but the reality is this is not easy, and it's not easy on purpose. We could have easily went in and flipped the switch and allowed for recreational marijuana in the city of Detroit. But the challenge is to make sure that the population, that the industry represents properly the population where the industry is located. And we've seen that that's not the case with medical marijuana and some other industries as well. And so that's been the major goal. But that's from my end for sure. And I know I'll be able to dig more into that. That's the big thing that has changed, certainly on my end and what we've seen in terms of law enforcement.
Yeah, and then I'm going to jump over to my state senator, Marshall Bullock. If you can jump in, give an introduction, as well as what do you feel like has changed since the legalization of cannabis?
Okay, so I am State Senator Marshall Bullock. I represent a great deal of Detroit, Lincoln Park, Allen Park, and Southgate, but you know, I work for everybody. And being a Detroiter, I second that what the Councilman Tate has said, is that, you know, we legalized it, and then before the state could put rules in place, people jumped the gun and started doing things as they saw the industry going to grow, which it started to explode. And then they made medical marijuana licenses only for those who didn't have felonies, etc. And so they said only the folks with recreation, who wanted recreational adult use licenses, couldn't have felonies. And then we fought hard to get that changed. So you can have a felony in certain areas and still be able to get into this cannabis space, because it was a barrier. And most of the models that they use are those that were developed in urban America on how to move product, right? And so there are groups that are working hard in the activist space. There are groups working hard in the policy-making space. And just as Councilman Tate said, we're trying to make sure that we are thoughtful in making sure we don't create unintended consequences and loopholes or allow the industry to move forward without us. And so I know he's saying he's taking heat for taking time on the ordinances in Detroit, but there are other places that are moving. They're kind of watching Detroit, you know, whether it's Flint, Muskegon Heights, and other urban American cities, to make sure that they include their population in the industry without being flushed out or being at the tail end. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so we are really consciously making sure that there is some social equity and that expungement happens and folks I'm even asking for us to, I heard her at the introduction about the war on drugs. Well, see, you know, the war on drugs is allegedly over because now it's opioids. And because, you know, Tyrone and them don't really use opioids. When we had the crack pandemic or epidemic, we were criminalized. And now that Johnny and them use these opioids, they want to be therapeutic in how we intervene, and we don't want to send Johnny to jail, and he needs counseling. So I would like us to reevaluate sentencing guidelines of folks that went to jail for 10 years for having 5 crack rocks, you know, times 5 is 50 years, they're still in jail. So we need to reevaluate all of these things, since we are saying that these things are now, you know, we've made marijuana legal. We're looking back at sentencing guidelines. We understand systematic, you know, systemic racism put folks in the Black community in jail longer. So that's what we're doing, just being real intentional and thoughtful. And I know it feels like we're taking a long time, but we want to try to get as close to being right as possible.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Yeah. Let's jump over to Mitzi Rudak. If you could give an introduction. I think I said your last name wrong, so I apologize, Queen.
We can't hear you, sis. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So Mitzi Rudak, I am founder of Black Cannabis Access, and it is an organization that really was born out of the need to fill in the gaps of getting us to the legal side of the cannabis industry. So what we do is give step-by-step instruction on the business development and as well as industry development. So what that looks like is really preparing us for this industry. That looks like investors, getting ready for investors. That's getting ready for the Detroit process in order to receive licensing in this industry. So it's a lot to deal with, and we make sure that we prepare us for this industry, specifically Black people, because nobody's catering to us. No one is coming and giving us this information at all. So Black Cannabis Access has stepped in to make sure that we provide those resources and tools and education.
Yeah.
So what was the question?
What's changed since legalization?
What has changed since legalization? Really, it's almost like the pandemic. A lot of things just kind of showed its face. It really showed what was missing. It really showed the gaps that are missing in our community when it comes to economics. Specifically, I mean, this industry is an industry, yet, and they're putting together these programs, yet with no financing. Once again, no kind of resources, no kind of tools in order to succeed and sustain. So the legalization just exposed some more disparities, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And then let's go over to State Rep Jewell Jones. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, family. State Representative Jewell Jones from the great District 11, covering all of Inkster, all of Garden City, Dearborn Heights, Livonia, and Westland. I would have to agree with everything that's been said so far. I definitely agree with Mitzi, I believe, the sister that was just speaking. I think that a lot of disparities have been exposed, and I think that, you know, regardless of interest that was already taken in urban communities, that you can see the interest has been spiked recently with a lot of people trying to move in to develop the area in terms of the marijuana industry, the cannabis industry. So I think right now, quite frankly, with people my age, I've been having quite a lot of conversations with folks who want to be educated about the process, who want to get more involved in the process, but at the same time, been having conversations with people my age and even over my age that have, you know, been victims of the system. Even people that are locked up now, figuring out with the laws changing, is it any way to make them whole? And so I think that I believe it was Senator Bullock mentioned that people rushed into the business and people rushed into the industry, and even the state, while they took their time. And I know Councilman Tate has been taking their time in the city, making sure they have an equitable program. I think that by us talking about the issue without having all the details, laid out, it kind of just created a huge ball of confusion for a lot of people.
Yeah. Let's jump over to Zane Williams. Zane, are you on? All right, Chris Jackson, if you can jump on and tell us what you believe have changed since the legalization, do an introduction as well.
Yeah, what's happening, everybody? Chris Jackson from Pontiac, Michigan. I am an operator in Michigan, meaning partners and I own a few operating retail provisioning centers, dispensaries, one in Ypsilanti, one in Detroit, and I'm also on the board for the National Cannabis Industry Association. So what's changed? I echo the sentiments that everybody else had to say first and foremost. But a different perspective is that there's at least some remnant of opportunity. The numbers don't necessarily show it right now, right? But I will say that rarely has there been an industry that's gone from its infant stage or not existing to an infant stage or previously prohibition that at least echoed that they wanted to see people of color actually be able to have a chance to participate, right? To my knowledge, it's never happened. So, we need to do what we need to do to make sure that we hold people accountable for making sure that that happens. But at the very least, there's a sense of if we do some of the right things, there's some opportunity. I think Rep. Jewell Jones was correct when he said that it was because people took so long, particularly because, local municipalities are becoming more and more sophisticated. Because that was the case, people decided to take it into their own hands. And what ended up happening is this predatory individuals decided to go into places like Pontiac and say, we're going to put this on a referendum on the ballot to get it passed. And it's not going to be in your favor necessarily, but, all your people see is weed. And so that's all they're going to vote for ultimately, right? And so some of those things need to be undone, redone, and built from the ground up. But if we do things collectively as entrepreneurs and as legislators, I think there might be some real opportunity for us to be able to participate.
Yeah. Zane, are you with us now? Okay. All right, we're going to jump over to Devontae. If you could give a brief introduction and what you believe has changed since the legalization.
Hi, I'm Devontae Jordan. I'm an owner of Jordan Accounting Services, and I provide accounting services for cannabis businesses. Not much has changed because at the federal level, it's still a Schedule I substance, so you can't deduct your ordinary business expenses. So the current problem right now with cannabis businesses is their tax rates are extremely high because you can't make the necessary deductions that anyone else would make. So until that's a change, we're going to keep running to this roadblock of, cutting into your profits, higher tax rates, harder to operate, things of that nature. So if we can get that, removed or whatever, that big hurdle, whatever, it can be like, more beneficial for the cannabis industry. I understand it's in its infancy, but, to me, it feels like they're kind of like dragging their feet on it, so.
Mike McCurdy, welcome. If you give a brief introduction and answer what you believe has changed since.
Sure, thank you. Mike McCurdy with the Cannabis Caucus of the Michigan Democratic Party. I'm the chair. We exist to try to pressure politicians in our party to be more progressive on cannabis issues. As far as what has changed, largely there's a lot of people who are already fairly wealthy who are getting wealthier off of cannabis right now. I think that's really disappointing. I know there we have some programs out there to try to create some equity in the cannabis business. There's not enough. My primary concern, frankly, first and foremost, is we still have people sitting in prison for cannabis-related crimes. And our caucus is working really hard. We've been working with the Attorney General Office. They're supposed to be getting us a comprehensive list of people who are still sitting behind bars. We know Michael Thompson's been in for a couple of decades. We've got Rudy Gamo, who was locked up for serving a 5-year sentence right now for running a cannabis business. So I know people personally who can't get jobs because they have cannabis on their records. So we need to get the expungement stuff. We need to get people out of prison, and that I think is my primary concern.
Yeah. Zane, are you able to jump in and do an introduction? And Burton, are you back with us?
Okay, she said.
I am here. I am here. I was muted. Burton Brown Consulting Group, multi-client lobbyist. I represent City of Flint, Hurley Medical Center, a couple of places in the City of Flint that you guys are probably familiar with. I represent a couple other things, but for the sake of the call, I have a few clients in the marijuana space, and I think we kind of touched on every point. I won't go back over what everyone has went over. So I think obviously it being decriminalized, us being marginalized, economic development is at a halt. Cities are not having the level of input that they should have on the state side. And with that said, cities are being left to their own devices, and not every city has a James Tate. So that's I think something we need to focus on.
Yeah. So I think Naja Nava left me, thank you for sharing. I think Naja Nava left me with all of the simple questions to ask about what is transition, so that we can create a baseline of understanding for the conversation. So the next question is, African Americans are not represented as cannabis entrepreneurs at the same rate that we are represented as customers or as victims of criminalization. And I wanted to shoot this to you, James Tate and Mitzi. Why do you all think this is? You're muted, Councilman Tate.
Got it. So, I think there's a couple of different reasons. One, of course, the access to resources and capital. That's, I think, one of the top priorities or top issues in communities where you have disproportionate enforcement of marijuana-related laws and arrests. You'll find typically a lot of African Americans, and we've seen that. That doesn't relate to who is consuming cannabis, but that is all about the arrest rate and the way that the law is executed. So I think there is still in addition to the lack of resources, a healthy fear for some folks who don't trust that the law will be applied evenly to Black folks, to Detroit. Those are two major issues. And I think what I found, there are a number of African Americans who actually have resources, who have clean records and have no issues, but culturally, we have been told that cannabis is bad, cannabis is wrong, it's illegal, it's the gateway. And when you have older generations, I'm 45 years old, for some on this call, I'm old, right? But people who are older than me, they absolutely believe, overwhelmingly, at least in my interactions with them, the narrative that's been pushed forward about cannabis. And trying to turn that has been extremely difficult. We made some strides in that direction. And there are some folks who, may have a different projection than how they truly believe. So they may consume, but behind closed doors, but out and about, they are completely against it. So there's a host of reasons. To me, I believe those are, at least in my interactions, those are the reasons why we see the lack of Black folks in this industry, especially in the levels that we want to see.
Thank you for sharing. Mitzi?
So, propaganda, that's how reefer madness, everything Black just seems to just be bad. And it's just been like that from day one. So that's why Black Cannabis Access focuses on ownership. We are committed to creating owners. And that's something that's different. No one is really talking about the economics of this industry and how impactful it can be. We're also not talking about, once we become owners and we're the foundation of this ownership, then we're able to spur the ancillary jobs and ancillary businesses that come. That's why it's so important for the ownership to be there. So it is unfortunate that on both sides, even in the Black culture, we don't even see the economic side of this industry. And so I deal with that daily. Every Sunday, I'm trying to give people comfort and breaking down these walls of what this industry is, what it looks like, all of the propaganda surrounding it. I mean, I've been in the industry since '96, but you wouldn't be able to tell anyone that. The person that is identified in this industry is, you know, a young Black boy hanging out on the street corner selling drugs, right? Drugs, selling dope, when this is nothing like that. Nothing at all like that. I know plenty of people who are older in this industry who have thrived in this industry. And for me and my family, it has definitely been the way that I've been able to feed my family. So we have to definitely have this conversation. It's important to have this conversation with our peers all the time, every day within our community, so we can definitely break these barriers and these propaganda and mindset, you know, surrounding this wonderful plant.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Chris, would you jump in?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons why I appreciate, you know, what Force Detroit does is because it's creating its own media outlet, right? So to Missy's point, if we can control the narrative, I think people's minds start to shift. It's hard to have group economics when there aren't any options to, right? So I believe that there is a core of people in inner cities that want to support businesses that are Black owned, right? Particularly in cannabis industry. But if there aren't any options, people aren't going to not go get what they perceive as a necessity for them, right? And so group economics is part of it, but without those options, and any time that, and to Councilman Tate's point, anytime that you start, you know, a new industry, the people who have access to the most resources are going to be the ones who get to benefit the most, right? Unless, you know, laws say otherwise. And so no different than if I go to, or someone that's Black that comes from a city like Pontiac goes to a bank, and you have someone that has resources or traditionally has done business and goes to a bank, that white person is probably going to get a loan before the Black person does, right? And so we're going to see that across every industry. And so the legislation has to match up. The legislation, the policy at the end of the day really has to match up to wanting to see equitable ownership in the industry. And unless that actually transpires, then it's going to be like any other industry. And in the long run, you know, we're going to be at 4 or 5% ownership ultimately. So in a way, I just echo with both, you know, with both of those folks just said, but it needs to be reiterated. Like, there needs to be options for there to be group economics, but the legislation has to match up in order to be able to participate.
Yeah. So I want to jump into like some financial questions for Devontae and Burton. So how, if you are entering into the cannabis industry, how do people keep their money secure? Like, what funds are there available? What banking institutions or trusts are people using? Because as of right now, it seems still pretty impossible to say that you're going to be an entrepreneur and bank safely.
Devontae, I'll jump in real quick, and I'll leave some time. So there are a couple avenues. Community banking is one that everybody has talked about. Fees are ridiculous, but that is an option. The other thing is, and this is,
we can't hear you.
I'm sorry, are you there?
You're breaking up.
Oh, okay. I had a call come in. So to have the bandwidth again to do group economics. So financing may be something like going to a bank and traditionally applying for a loan or a commercial loan may not be the answer, right? There are opportunities where you have people of color in neighborhoods who have actual affluence. Detroit is a great example. You have people like Bill Picard, you have people like Marvin Beatty, these individuals who you can lean on to do maybe small loans. One of my mentors, Greg Eaton, he gave Magic Johnson one of his first loans. So I think that piece is really important. But what is more important is, if you're interested in being in this industry, is being aware of the rules and understand what you want to do. Don't just approach it as if you're going into an industry and it is not something that you can look at that people have done to scale. So have a very competent investment deck, develop those skills, right? I think this business is just like any other business, right? If you're looking for a loan for a clothing company, you should have the same diligence in your marijuana proposal that you have in your clothing company or in your grocery store. So I think those are the first steps. We have a lot of resources in our community that go untapped, and we also have a lot of potential. I think the young lady just talked about being in the industry in since 1996. I think there are a lot of people who are in the Black market now who could definitely be advisors, consultants, and even for that matter, talk about marketing, talk about specifically talk about gram pricing and things of that nature, which I believe goes underutilized and also goes under supported. But the big piece too is to make sure you know your craft. And for that, I'll leave the rest to Devontae.
Yeah, credit unions in Michigan have been pretty friendly with it. It's kind of like a word of mouth basis. And Dart Bank, they're not local, but they're out in like Midwestern Michigan. They've been pretty cannabis friendly. So along with that, try to get secure transporting your cannabis friendly companies that helps transport cash from your facility to wherever you want to store it and what have you. And now also on the premises, keeping cash secure, having daily cash counts in the morning and then in the evening, and then open the business the very next day, reconcile your cash, not keeping a whole bunch of cash on hand for throughout the week. So kind of make a bank run in a sense every 2 or 3 days, because you're a big target in this industry, because they know you're cash heavy, so you kind of have like a bullseye on you.
Yeah, so going back to the baseline questions, right? Thank you for sharing that. If a cop finds somebody with too much cannabis on them, what happens? And what happens when that same person it appears before a judge? How do they respond differently, perhaps, than they would have before?
And not just on like a person, but in the building or in the car. And I want to ask that question to Jewell Jones, if you don't mind taking that one. I want to know it from more of like the legislation perspective, because I also want to jump into what we have coming up for people who are in prison for being found with more than regulation.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, as we know, as we may know, under Proposal 1, adults who are 21 or older, they can legally possess up to 2.5 ounces of cannabis outside the home. And I know you're referring to different situations. So if you're inside the home, then you have 10 ounces. Additionally to that, adults can also, cultivate up to 12 cannabis plants in your home and possess no more than 15 grams at any time. I think if you're caught with more, I guess just from a interpretation side, the courts will have some leeway to, I guess, penalize you based on the situation. I think a lot of things are situation dependent right now, because it's just such an ambiguous area, especially depending on what community you're in. That's why I think it's important right now, and this is kind of aside from the conversation we're having, this national campaign with the presidents. We're looking at judges that are going to be in from, federal judges to local judges. And so depending on the areas you're in and the judges you appear before and the prosecutors you appear before, life can be very different depending on how they interpret the situation. And so I'm not really able to give a concrete answer on what happens if you get caught with more.
Yeah.
It really just depends on, the strength of your case, how well you articulate the reasoning for you having more and different things of that nature. That's what I would probably say right now.
Yeah. And Mitzi, we're going to pass that question to you too. I know when we were speaking earlier this month, you told me that there were 5 raids that happened like earlier this month, and just how our people are still being over criminalized, and what you're hearing with the base of people that I know you work with often.
And so if you could also include where those raids are happening. and some of the dynamics, because it's bizarre that these things are still happening if it's legal. You're muted, sis.
It's not really, because it's regulated. So if you don't have a license to grow and you're not underneath a caregiver patient model, you're not following the rules, you're going to get raided. And so people are not following the rules. That's why it's important for us to, everybody needs to be hands on deck when it comes to this cannabis industry. That's how important it is, because this going to continue to happen. We got to get people to understand and get educated to get on the other side. The money is different. It's way better on the other side anyway. The money is way different. It's 3 times more money on the other side than it is on the black market. It's so these things that are happening, I mean, they were happening in, I don't want to say, because somebody told me that wasn't supposed to tell me. So, but they were grow operations, and someone told on them, and so therefore they got a knock on the door, and then they got a sticker from the city saying stop your operation or else you will reap the consequences. These things are just going to continue to happen unless we start educating and getting into real business, turning these into real businesses and thriving on the other side. I mean, it's enough money for everybody.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was about to say, to Missy's point, right? So, you know, now that there is not much of a gray area that exists, right? So even caregivers are, like even caregivers now can't participate in the regulated market like they used to. And so there's a clear divide that's happening now between, you know, the traditional market, AKA the black market, and the gray market, which is caregivers, and, you know, what's happening on the regulated market. And so there's a bridge that needs to be created, you know, and a lot of it probably has to do with trust, right? Or lack thereof, from people who are in the traditional market who see the money and see the opportunity, but there aren't a lot of people like us, right, that have success, or, you know, or a lot of groups or organizations that are saying, look, let us teach you how you can actually participate in this market. Because to Missy's point, it's not going to stop anymore, right? Because now there's a clear mandate as to what's legal and what's illegal. Even though it was illegal before, there wasn't the opposite side of the spectrum. Now there is, right? So there isn't much of a conversation that needs to happen from a judge's perspective necessarily. And so absolutely we need to put the right people in these seats, the right prosecutors that might be more lenient. But, you know, our job, I think, is to provide equitable opportunities for people to transition from one market to the other. And then once those real opportunities exist, whatever that looks like, we can talk about it. But once those opportunities exist, it's going to be up to us then as individuals to say, I'm interested in going into the legal market, right? Because people can't force you to do something against your will ultimately, right? So you can only lead a horse to water, and then at that point they have to drink it. And so once education happens, once equitable opportunities are presented, which is something, a big gap right now that needs to be worked on, then I think we transition over to, okay, now it's the individual that makes that decision for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that brings up a good point.
Can I just add one thing as well, if I may? With Detroit, what we found is that there are some officers who understand and know the law, and there's some who absolutely don't. I've got a email from the law department, I want to say it was about 2 weeks ago. There was a location that absolutely had well more, far more than they were supposed to have based upon the law. And the officers didn't do anything because they were afraid that they were going to go afoul of the state law. And they didn't want to get sued, didn't want the city to get sued, didn't want any charges on themselves internally. So they fell back. So we're finding ourselves having to constantly, when these kind of issues arise, train the police department. So where you have a situation where they may over police, we have some other situations where they're falling back because they just don't want to find themselves in a situation where they're, again, afoul of state law. And what was really surprising, a friend of mine a few weeks ago We were talking, and he told me that someone had broken into his car, and they stole his, along with some of the other things, they stole his cannabis. He saw the individual who had stolen the stuff, and he chased him down the street. A police officer, he called him. Police officers were right there. This was in downtown Detroit. Police officers saw him, all this going on. They arrested the individual who broke into his car, and they also gave him back his cannabis. They didn't give it to him in his hand. They put it on the hood of the vehicle, because again, they didn't know if I give it to him, and is this the proper thing? But I know that there's a law that says that marijuana is legal. So we're finding that it really varies, and that's unfortunate that we're at that point. But the good news is we're finding these situations out and giving us an opportunity to re-educate our department.
Yeah. Wow, that's a crazy insight. Thank you for sharing that.
So I want to move over to talking about the expungement bills that we have on the floor in the House and the Senate.
I've got one more question, and Chris brought it up. So if I have a history, a cannabis related criminal history, what has changed for me in this new legal cannabis world?
I can start that conversation, and I know everybody kind of.
You already did. You touched on it a little bit. Yes, go ahead. And then Mike touched on it too. So if you want to add on.
So if you have a history, what the Marijuana Regulatory Agency, or Marijuana Regulatory Agency, the MRA, has done, and it needs to be better. But they've essentially said, if you have a history, we want to give you an opportunity to participate in the market. Right. So right now, if you've previously had a felony, you can get, in this case, it would be, correct me if I'm wrong, but 25% off of what would be the application fee to be deemed or considered a social equity applicant. Right. Now, that coupon doesn't mean anything, right? Like at the end of the day, that's not a lot of money, and it's not getting to like the main root of the issue. But what it does tell me is that they've at least set out a path to say we're interested in allowing people who have been previously federally convicted for cannabis to be able, or federally or have a felony related to cannabis, to be able to participate in the market. Now we need to do what we need to do to fix the infrastructure of it, but at least they've put rules and policy out there that says that they can participate. So go ahead. I mean, I know Missy has some other thoughts you want to
jump in now, but go ahead. I don't want to cut you off at all.
No, you good. You ready to jump? So go ahead. Do your thing.
So it's flawed. There's no transparency. So I can have a felony, right? But it doesn't say how many felonies. It doesn't say if my felony can have a gun charge, which most of the time you're going to have a gun charge when you're dealing with it in the city, because you're protecting yourself in these kind of circumstances. It's not clear. And that's the problem that I'm having when I'm helping my social equity applicants going forward with the process. And that's the issue that I have with the state, period. Like, they gave us these coupons, but then it's like, how do you expect someone to spit out six grand or a 4,500 or 3,000 when you don't even know if you can get past the state, because it's so ambiguous? And you're already afraid, and you're already afraid because you don't want to expose your background in the first place. So now you're checking in their background, and then you have all these felonies, you have these misdemeanors. How many can you have? The state haven't even defined or even said how many or what that's supposed to look like. So I'm just really trying to get these answers out of the state so I can move us forward. And that is the barrier. That's the BS that goes on at the state level. And then that makes it harder for Councilman Tates and other cities to be able to implement legislation to help their residents get in this industry, because the state is not even paying attention to that. They just put out this social equity program and was like, hey, we did something, here are your discounts, and then it left everybody else to kind of figure out how to go through or think what they're thinking, or it's a mess to me. It makes our jobs harder. It makes us very, it still makes us fearful, and it still creates barriers. They didn't eliminate any barriers.
Yeah, I just want to jump in real quick and say that I think for a lot of people with records, or even those people who have just been in the industry for decades, who have never been caught, things haven't really changed. They're still operating. Cops are still raiding people, frankly. They're still kicking in people's doors. They're still taking people's property. They're still locking people up. And I think we got to be really careful as advocates that we don't accept that. That we don't say, oh yeah, hey, they were breaking the rules. So, you know what? They've always been breaking the rules. Most of us have. And the rules change. They're kind of, I can't keep up with them. I read this stuff all the time and I can't keep up with it. How are people supposed to keep up with it? I think we need to get law enforcement. We need to get police out of the business of raiding people, period. We should move enforcement over to licensing and regulatory affairs department, like everything else is regulated. Every other legal industry is regulated. I'm a builder. If I lose my building license and I go put on a roof anyway, guess what? The cops aren't going to kick in my door, take me to prison, and take all my building equipment. The cops got to be out of the business of enforcing marijuana, and I think we really got to push for that.
Yeah. So I want to jump back to the state rep and the senator, so we can talk a little bit about the expungement packages and what we have underway in the House as well as the Senate, and if either of you want to speak about the legislation that's also up for the U.S. as far as the expungements and legalization go federally.
Well, I can hop in. I'm not sure what the senator has to say, but and I'm not able. I can speak intelligently about the federal package, but I know in the House we've kicked it over to the Senate. And we've been having conversations about the package. It was in the right direction. I think it could have been a lot stronger. It was watered down, but I think that we realized the current posturing of government here in the state, that the Republicans are still running the House and the Senate, although we do have the executive office. So we're not quite where we need to be to really push through strong legislation. Hopefully once we flip the House this year, that'll be something that is on the horizon. We've dealt with a lot of different things. I think the major piece around this expungement package was that we were trying to streamline it. And so even dealing with the marijuana expungement in particular, we're trying to say that, hey, instead of going through all these different processes, let's go ahead and have you fill out a sheet. If you fill it out, a prosecutor has 60 days to challenge your expungement request. If it doesn't happen, it's automatically expunged. If it does happen, then you'll have to go through the process again. But I think that we want to ultimately move to a place where expungements happen automatically, especially when we're dealing with marijuana convention, just to make people whole. Some of the other things that I'm not sure if you want to discuss, we're dealing with basically congregating different felonies and misdemeanors, different charges into one. And so it'd be a little easier because right now, or presently, you can do one felony and 2 misdemeanors. So they're trying to expand into 2 felonies and 4 misdemeanors. So we're basically looking at how do we group together different crimes so we can make it easier for people to have their records expunged. That was being worked on for a while. It's been kind of quiet since the world fell apart because a lot of things have been really committed towards the coronavirus. But I assume that namely after the election especially as well, since we'll be entering lame duck, that we may see some of these coming up back for discussion. Hopefully we can get these taken care of before the year is out.
Yeah.
From a federal perspective, and then I guess whatever questions you guys have, but from a federal perspective, so there are some things, first and foremost, like cannabis needs to be decriminalized first and foremost, right? It needs to be removed as a substance 1 drug, which is on the same level as crack, heroin, cocaine, right? First and foremost, about 33 states or so have already opted in some form or fashion to allowing legal cannabis. And so with that in mind, it's just a matter of time before the U.S. actually does it. From my perspective, you either have a lame duck president in a couple of years that can't be reelected, who probably won't care and would be okay with federal legalizing anyway, or you'll have a Democratic president that's going to run on legalizing in the first place. And so I believe within the next 3 or 4 years, we'll really start to see some movement. The Safe Banking Act did pass the House and is in Senate right now. And that's a big deal because it was the first legal bill from a federal perspective for cannabis that actually got voted positively through the House. And ultimately, that would allow people to have access to not only banking, but have access to receiving loans from banks. But the MORE Act, I think, is the more important one from a equity perspective, social equity perspective, which is the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act. That's the MORE Act. And so without getting into too many details about it, the MORE Act would see some level of social equity, but I'm also a believer that once federal legalization happens, social equity will become less and less of a priority ultimately. And so my perspective is the conversation really needs to start shifting to just equitable opportunities opposed to specifically social equity. The MORE Act was going to be up this month, and I think it got postponed at the federal level to be voted through the House. After, I think when that happens, and I think it will happen, but once the MORE Act is passed, unto itself, it doesn't have the bones to be legislation, but it's a step in the right direction. So I just wanted to answer your question directly about what's transpiring at the federal level.
May I add one thing as well?
Yes.
So while we are in the process of waiting for federal laws to change and state law as well, and they're moving down the pipe, we in the city of Detroit, we have a program called Project Clean Slate. I don't know if the viewers are aware of it, and I just want to make sure they have that information that allows for expungements of their record. Anyone who's looking and watching right now, please, if you are looking to expunge your record and it qualifies, clearly if it's a marijuana related crime, it would qualify. And that phone number would be 313-237-3024. It is 313-237-3024. It's absolutely free. And they will match you with a worker who will take your case on. This year, because of COVID, we haven't been able to do the big fairs like we've done in the past, but we are doing the one-on-ones, especially those individuals that are coming through the Detroit at Work program. If in fact you have an issue with your record, we ask if you want to go through this expungement program. If so, we'll take you through that initiative. But it's not just for those who are applying to Detroit Work programs, but it's in general. So again, those who are looking to, at least in the city, you have to be a resident of the city of Detroit for this particular program, Project Clean Slate. Phone number again, 313-237-3024.
And that's a free program as well?
Absolutely free, yes ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to thank State Representative Abram Aiyash for joining us. Are you able to unmute and share the state level legislation that's underway?
Yeah, so I just wanted to touch quickly on one of the bills, House Bill 5120, which is part of the package of bills that Jewell mentioned. That bill is the one that does the automatic expungement. So as you all know, there's over 200,000 people in the state of Michigan that have misdemeanor charges for marijuana. And that stops a lot of people. I know 3 people personally who could not get a job with the Census Bureau this year because of that very issue, right? So what this does, to Jewell's point, is once you apply for that expungement, the onus is not on the person getting the record expunged, but rather the prosecutor to make sure that if they do want to keep that on the person's record, that they would have to challenge it in court. Now, this is where we have to be strategic and push our prosecutors to make sure that they're not going after people for these petty crimes. I mean, excuse me, they're not crimes, but they shouldn't go after people for something as minuscule as having marijuana. It also works on getting rid of some of those non-violent felony charges as well.
I got a quick question. When you say automatic expungement, are you truly meaning automatic expungement? Or do these individuals have to go get their records, then they have to fill out some paperwork, and then they have to go somewhere, and then, like, what does that process look like? Because that can be a barrier.
Right. So it's the way it's going to work is, and Jewell, if you want to hop in, I'd appreciate it too. But you would apply for the expungement, and then it automatically is waived. Like, you don't have to wait for a court date. You don't have to do anything. So then it pretty much puts the responsibility on follow-up and follow-through with the prosecutor's office.
So is it going to be like an online application? Is it two-page? Like, what?
Jewell, you guys.
So,
thank you, brother.
Yeah. So what I said initially, it would be a form typically that I would assume that, you know, everything will still be in debate. This hasn't been passed through. It's not concrete legislation just yet, so it's still being amended and whatnot moving forward. But what we would assume is that it'll be a form or whatnot that you would submit. But of course, we're in the midst of pandemic now, so I'm not exactly sure how soon we'll be looking into, you know, hard copies of things. So maybe, depending on how well this moves through, it may be something that's done online. But of course, you'll get your information, you'll put it on this form, submit it. And like my brother said, the onus is not on the person applying for the expungement. It will really be on the prosecutors if they determine that they would like to challenge your petition to expunge. And so once the process is rolling, after those 60 days, if it's not challenged, it becomes automatic. Now, the notification process, I'm not exactly sure how that's going to end up going. Like what I'm saying, it's a live conversation that's still going on. So all the details are not, I don't want to tell you something that's not going to happen, but we're just presuming that you turn in the form, the prosecutor hopefully doesn't challenge it. After 60 days, you receive some kind of notification or whatnot that your record is clear. That is the intent of the streamlined expungement. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's automatic, because it's still a few things you have to do. It's not like automatic in some states where we can put together an algorithm in the system, and if anyone fits that, they're automatically taken care of. Don't have to worry about anything else. So it is a little bit that you have to do.
I would like that to happen. Why can't we have that here?
I mean, that we would like to have that here. You know, rest in peace to Representative Isaac Robinson. We discussed this heavily, but like I said, because of the way that our government is set up right now, it's just some things that is not going to come through. We can talk about it quite often, but it's just some things that are not going to come through.
Rep, let me step in on that. She asked a very good question about why. One of the major reasons is the cost. So there was a expected cost of somewhere between $10 and $20 million for the expungement process in general. And then, just so you understand, expungement doesn't mean that the record doesn't exist. What it is the documentation is still available at the court. It's just not something a person doing a background check can find out. So it's omitted. It's not like it's completely erased from the system forever. Nothing ever is, as you are aware. It's just sealed, so you won't be able to look at it. And because the way the court systems are set up in the state of Michigan, the cost is so prohibitive. So that's one of the main.
He must have just got a phone call.
It's not completely automatic as it relates to the algorithm Brother Jewell described.
Correct.
Well,
But
if I could jump in,
we can get there.
If I could jump in really quick, I've got a concern about the records. And I've asked this of Isaac Robinson, and he was never able to quite answer it. Is I know that people, even with not only misdemeanors, but even with civil infractions, marijuana civil infractions, it goes on their driver's record with the Secretary of State, regardless if there was a vehicle involved. And that actually prevents people from being able to get jobs that are related to driving. Would the expungement remove things from the Secretary of State record? And also, Also, would it cover civil infractions?
So personally, I wasn't aware of that, brother. That's something I would have to look into. But I'm assuming if we're looking to expunge felonies and misdemeanors, that civil infractions will be able to be tied into that. But I don't want to promise it, Chief. I wasn't aware that was something that was going on. But definitely check that out.
So if I can add one more point to this. So of the package of the bills that were sent to the Senate, House Bill 5120 has a very strong likelihood to pass. It did have bipartisan support when it went over to Senate. Just so you guys know where the bill is at, it did pass the House. It was sent over to Senate. It's currently in committee. And as soon as the Senate votes on it, I believe there weren't too many changes to the bill, but as soon as the entire Senate votes on it, it'll go back to the House for final passage. And then the bill can likely go into law by the end of this year, which would give Brother Isaac a public act under his name. So there is definitely an opportunity to codify this as a first step. It's certainly not going to be where we need to be at, right? But I think this highlights, excuse me, this highlights the need to really change the structure of the legislature. I'm not trying to get partisan here, but this was the best that Isaac and Jewell Jones were able to do amidst the supermajority that is currently in the Senate. So, there's some light at this tunnel.
Yeah. So right now, current regulations don't encourage small scale weed men to become entrepreneurs. I know some neighborhoods, it's like you have to put up whatever it costs to open your business. And then there are like buy-ins for the neighborhood that go back to the neighborhood. Are there programs that incentivize this or that help small scale to become more of a legalized thing? Like, how do we encourage them to get on the legal side of it when it seems to be so expensive? That one is for Chris.
Cool. So, and the cool thing is that a lot of people on this call are going to be able, like, I've talked to a number of people on this call about this very topic. And so trust me, there's going to be a lot of perspective. But so right now, Burton and I are both on the MRA's Racial Social Justice Task Force, which is basically looking at the social equity program as it stands and revamping it to hopefully be more equitable and actually get to the crust of a lot of the issues that we spoke about today specific to business. Our subcommittee is business development, actually, and one of the things that we've discussed are opportunities for individuals who are currently not. So you asked, are there programs that exist? I'm telling you about one that we're trying to actually get mandated through the state, right?
Okay.
And so the goal of what we're trying to propose is there an opportunity for individuals who just want to support the industry? Like, they may not necessarily want to have a license and or be a plant touching entrepreneur, but they want to contribute to being an investor in a lucrative industry, people of color in particular, right? And they want to invest in social equity oriented companies. Right now, as it stands, there is no streamlined opportunity for people who are interested to say, without going on a license, to say, hey, I want to contribute X amount of dollars just because I'm interested in seeing these social equity or minority owned businesses flourish, right? So one of the things that we're doing is we're looking at legislation related to the Mile Bill that allows for crowdfunding, rules that currently exist that don't allow for anything more than one opportunity to invest in a bill under the 9% rule, which means that you aren't necessarily scrutinized the way that you would be if you wanted to actually obtain a full-blown license. So we're looking at putting together a proposal as we speak. Literally, we had a meeting earlier today to talk about what the MRA can do to mandate through policy that would allow for investors to participate and then support minority specific businesses. And to your point, when you have small scale individuals. When you say small scale traditional market, right? So I think what they were trying to accomplish is by creating in the recreational market that 100 plant grow license, the Class A license. When they created the micro business license, right, which is more what they envision would be more of a boutique type of operation, right, where you kind of grow and sell through your own operation. I think, you know, their goal was to try to incentivize individuals who are in a traditional Black market, right, to have an opportunity to participate in something that doesn't necessarily require millions upon millions necessarily, right, in comparison to the larger operations. Now, it hasn't worked very effectively, right, just to be candid. But as we start to work through what the mandates look like with the MRA, our hope is that Andrew Briswell actually, and seemingly, he wants to actually see it through. So our hope is that the state says, hey, based on, you know, everything that we've been presented, here's 3 policy points. These are things that you can do right now that doesn't require any legislation change. We need to do something to make sure that we allow minority people to be able to participate. So I don't know of any that exist, but I do know that we're in the process of trying to make some of that stuff happen.
Councilman Tate, is there anything on the city level?
You are muted, sir.
Sorry about that. So right now, no, we don't, but we are working on that as we build the recreational marijuana ordinance and the elements that involve the social equity aspect of it. We are looking to identify a fund that will assist like what we're calling legacy Detroiters, individuals who've been here and have a stake in the city of Detroit, providing them with an opportunity to have benefits above and beyond just general applicants. And I know there are a number of cities that have attempted that. We're looking at Oakland. Oakland is one for sure that has, we're emulating a lot of things that we've seen in Oakland. We're working on, we're still navigating the process. The challenge that we have is that Oakland is part of California, and California law is a lot more liberal than the state of Michigan. So we've got to work within the bounds of the 4 corners of the law that we are provided, because we know this is a very litigious industry. And, you know, so we haven't identified all the pieces yet, but we are absolutely working on it.
Yeah, so this is the best part of the conversation for me, and that's when we transition the conversation into like dreaming, right? What could be, we heard what's underway, we heard what the challenges are, what currently exists, and now we're transitioning into like thinking about what could be, right? And you went, Councilman Tate, exactly where I was about to go, to the Oakland program. And a lot of the dynamics, with the exception of the liberalness of the state, mirrors Michigan, right? Mirrors Detroit. So when you think about like an ideal program, first, could you describe the Oakland Equity Program? And then could you talk about like that potential for Detroiters? And as you craft the legislation or the opportunities that you're currently crafting, how could we support you to do something very similar and very, you know, ideal for our community?
So I'll be honest, I'm not the expert on all pieces that Oakland has. Now, Mitzi, on the other hand, who has been working with us, that's her thing. And she's been assisting me along the way. But what I will say is I know that one element that is in Oakland is at least 50% of residents being provided the licenses. That has been the goal from day one all the way back last year, before we had the uprising and people started talking about equality and inclusion and diversity. So we've been working on that from day one. We've also, again, as we talked about, looking at a fund that will assist entrepreneurs, legacy Detroiters who have a stake in the city of Detroit, who can prove that they have a stake in Detroit, which is extremely key. Oakland also, let me just say, when we start looking at the fund, again, let me back up. The other piece is land use, which is an extremely big piece. So we're working right now with our real estate division to identify the properties that would qualify within the zoning. And
so you're still being extremely technical.
yes,
I want us to dream a bit, like what is possible, right?
yeah. So again, let me just say, let me dial back. Marijuana is not my passion. Cannabis is not my passion, but my passion is my people.
Okay.
All right? So that's what I want to tell you, my people. And so what I want to do is do whatever and pull whatever lever I can pull, take whatever information, whatever piece of legislation, law, idea that's out there that I can implement here in the city of Detroit to ensure that Detroiters have not only an opportunity in the industry, but have a chance to succeed long-term, generationally in this industry. So I just always like to put that out there in terms of all the law. I don't know them all. I'm working and focusing on Detroit and getting us to that point. But going back to the land use, and when I say land use and zoning, that's essentially where you're allowed to place your facility, where you're allowed to utilize the license that the city of Detroit will provide you. That is important for us to make sure that Detroiters have the ability to not get confined to one small little area or an area that does not allow for growth. We are still working through those pieces right now, and I know you said I'm being technical. I'm sorry, that's how my brain works. You know,
it's okay. We're gonna jump over to Mitzi. She's gonna
Mitzi,
take us to dreamland of what would happen if this were.
You are muted, sis. We want to hear those good dreams.
I can get technical too, and I'm gonna try. So Dreamland, I mean, Councilman Tate knows that, you know, I threw everything at him. And when we first started, we had like a 5-hour conversation, and we went at it. And I'm like, you know, Black people got to get in it. Detroiters got to get in it. And I threw everything at him. I looked at LA, I looked at Oakland, I looked at Chicago, I looked at everybody's social equity program, and then I just started framing it, like taking pieces of this, taking pieces of that. And I was like, Councilman Tate, this is what, you know, what we need, because I want to ensure that Detroiters get in it. So dreaming, look, sorry, but not sorry. I do not want us to walk into any dispensary or any provisioning center, any retail store, and it don't look like us in our own city, period. So that's where, that Detroiters, this is the industry, and this is the time that we're able to finally own an industry from A to Z. We're talking about producing, manufacturing, wholesaling, the whole entire supply chain. This is it. I don't know what other industry we're going to be able to do this in. So that's why I had to have this conversation with Councilman Tate, and I'm texting him and I'm calling him, and we having these conversations because I needed for him to understand what's at stake. Detroit economics, social economics is at stake right now. It's 2020 and we still haven't progressed economically at all. So here's our chance. This industry is it.
Can I push, not to cut you off, sis? Sure. I appreciate your vigor, but can I push a bit around vision? Sure. So, and correct me if my understanding is wrong. From my research,
do you want me to jump in and explain the Oakland program and the benefits?
I'm getting a back.
Yeah, I am. I'm getting feedback.
I'm not getting any.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it may be coming from Mike.
Yeah, it's coming from Mike.
Yeah.
Okay.
Coming from Mike.
So, yeah. So I think according to what I read around the Oakland, and I can jump in and explain it. But no, that's I want to specifically talk about how businesses are paired with people who have direct criminalized experience with the cannabis industry. And in order to get a zoning permit, if I'm correct, right, in order to get all their permits clear, they have to sponsor a and I know we've been calling it the traditional market, but I think regular folks know just hustlers who are trying to move their business up notches. And I don't know if everybody who we're talking to knows that when we say traditional market, we're talking about, regular folks with bags of weed. And how do you become an entrepreneur? How do you get opportunity in this market that is here that we've been harmed by otherwise? So, like, do we have the creative imagination to make corporate cannabis industry folks pay for small scale entrepreneurs to get started?
Burton, do you want to take that part?
Yeah, I was going to jump in. So piggybacking off of what Chris kind of talked about, there are definitely funds that exist currently. But I want to go back to the idea of the micro business. I am a very strong supporter of that idea in a natural sense, because it's one of the few licenses where you can get vertically integrated day one. And I think the biggest issue that we're having is not the micro business model. It is the rules regarding the micro business model. So this is the challenge too, right? You're talking about dreams, right? Every Tuesday, there's a LARA committee that meets specifically to discuss rules on marijuana, MRA. One of the biggest concerns for people in the micro business is 150 plants. That's not enough to be solvent, especially when Councilman Tate was about to lead into speculation and land use. When you talk about speculation, once you identify the areas that are zoned, you will then have individuals coming into the marketplace, and the price of land just jumps up. You're like, wait a second, this was $25,000 a year ago. Now it's $250,000. Well, I can't afford that. And then the other piece is, historically, Black folk, we don't have ownership because we weren't allowed to get loans to own commercial property. So you talk about redlining, you talk about all of the things that traditionally hurt our community. I think what we need to focus on, and this is where you talk about dreaming, is being real clear as officials, and also as people who are, the reason that these guys get elected, showing up and supporting them. When Jewell's talking about this kind of stuff, and he has 20 people at the committee hearing, it sounds a lot different, because they know, one, this is a year that's important, specifically if you're running an election, but in a general sense, I mean, this is a lame duck year. So it's very important that we are very mobile when it comes to these conversations. But one of the big pieces that I want to emphasize, micro businesses exist now, and we have 2 applicants at the state side because it's not economically viable. Cities can allow for 2 licenses on one site, which circumvents the 150 plant count. Cities could, even for that matter, allow for land use set aside, where you say, like Kalamazoo, 51% of ownership has to be local. Kalamazoo created these census tracts with their ordinance just now that allows for special, specifically if you're in a census tract, it won't preclude you if you're in a residential neighborhood, only if you're from that neighborhood. It won't preclude you if you have, say, another dispensary next door if you're from that community. At the end of the day, we know our communities have liquor store, church. What we won't see happen is, hopefully we won't see happen where these dispensaries are set up the same way, but we are not owning them. I think that's the biggest piece. But I'll let that conversation kind of stumble across with the reality that, and this is the crazy part. The reality is, I mean, we are the ones that allow individuals to come in our cities and buy our property. We have to be very, very specific about who we allow to purchase this land.
Yes, sir. I appreciate all the vigor and vision. Gratitude.
I'm driving, my bad.
So if we're dreaming, I think talking about the possibility of having community-owned spaces where people are allowed to sell their product, kind of like a farmer's market. One of the things Oakland did, it was like 15 years ago, I think I was in Oakland, when they actually made their dispensary workers employees of the city. And that was a way to, because the feds were starting to raid their dispensaries. And so they were giving their cannabis workers qualified immunity, protection from the feds. So that's a sort of an added benefit of running things through a city government, through a local government, is that you can actually give a level of protection to cannabis workers from potential federal prosecution.
Is there
Councilman Tate?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, is that something that we do here? Is that something we could do here? Is that possible in Dreamland?
It's possible in Dreamland. Of course, we've got to look at what is allowable by law. We haven't peeled that layer back, so that's one that we're going to have to look at. But I think the other thing, if I'm dreaming, is also ensuring that the people that we're trying to ensure that has the information about this industry has it. Because that's what we found at this point, that it's just the knowledge base is not there. And that's unfortunate. And we have done as much as we can to shift as many people. I mean, we get emails, phone calls, Mitzi will tell you, we're sending them over to her so that they are at least on the ground level understanding the basics. It takes a lot to go from that hustler to a straight up business person. You got to file taxes and do all these things. So walking them through that is a challenge, because this sometimes we're speaking language, like you said, technical stuff. We're speaking language that they don't understand and won't understand unless you have culturally competent individuals that are breaking it down to them and giving it to them so they can regurgitate it back and potentially even spread that on to somebody else.
Yeah. And that goes to the exact next daydreaming question that I have is it possible to incentivize entrepreneurship in this industry? So we know that there's a vibrant underground or traditional market. How do we support, cultivate, incentivize them to transition out of it? How do we give them wings?
Yeah, for us, I mean, it really is focusing on the ability to provide resources and land, and also in addition to that, giving a pathway to the information that will allow them to obtain the licenses that we're trying to provide to legacy Detroiters. That is extremely important. So resources in terms of financial, in terms of land and property, because we do have, again, a large inventory of property that we're just holding. Some of them are just sitting there, dilapidating and getting worse and worse every year. So we're working on that. But you talked a little bit about the incubator model in Oakland. We're looking to replicate some of that, not all of it, but a piece to it, to provide general applicants an incentive to work with legacy Detroiters or Detroiters who may not qualify for all of the benefits that we're looking to offer.
Yeah. And from the local level to the state level, right? Like in our conversations, the only thing that matters, and let me echo this, like the only categories that matter other than criminal justice reform are access to capital, mentorship, education opportunities, land acquisition, right? Like you take care of those three things, then everything else from an entrepreneurial and economic standpoint, plus criminal justice reform, of course, but those three things from an entrepreneurial perspective, like it solves the problem. And just let me say one thing, and I think you know, and I understand who our audience is, right? But I think part of it is how we see ourselves, right? So when I say traditional market, any other, you say illicit, you say black market, like it just automatically assumes criminalization. You know what I mean? And so when I say traditional market, I understand like there's an education gap that needs to happen so people understand what we're getting at. But the more that we perpetuate that language, the more everybody else is going to perpetuate that language. And it's not going to change. And that's the lens that people are going to be building policy through. And so language is extremely important, which is why I tend to say cannabis instead of the racist moniker marijuana, right? Or I say traditional market versus black market or illicit, because the people in power that Jewell Jones has to work with every day, or that James Tate has to work with every day, is seeing it through that lens. And so that's the only reason why I continue to say traditional market.
So I actually, go ahead.
I wanted to add two things. Oh, oops, I'm sorry. I just want to throw out there that licensing also is a factor. So providing licensing on that level to make it an easier transition is also important. So out in California, they have distribution and delivery service. We don't have those two licenses here. So just wanted to add that.
So, but
I'm happy you said that. So I have a group that will pay for anyone's license that qualifies as a social equity applicant. Anyone. We've done 20 applicants thus far. If you're applying for a micro business license and you're a social equity applicant, we will pay for your application. So that means
Hey,
that
Burton, can you drop a link? Can you drop a link or a number where people can contact you?
Yep. I'll put my information right in the chat.
Thank you, brother.
And so Mitzi, you are solving is your organization solving the mentorship issue that was touched on?
No, so I'm not in favor of the mentorship situation because most of the time a lot of the social equity programs are teaming us up with outsiders who are more well-resourced. So that can look like Chaldeans and other white people. And I just don't like that arrangement. Out in California, that arrangement is not working. They have changed it and revised it several times because of predatory and just disagreement. So I'm not in favor of that mentorship program. Our organization is really supporting individuals who would like to move forward in the industry, getting licensed and becoming owners.
So Mitzi, I know we talked about the Cannabis Equity Act that you worked on and submitted to state reps. I was going to ask that you could tell State Rep Jewell Jones as well as Burton about it a little bit and see if that's something that we can try to incorporate just to make sure that certain communities that have been experiencing over policing are now able to make sure that they have those equities and to make sure that people who are directly impacted get to also input on legislation as well.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for you all. Like, I'm so super duper grateful because you all are giving me a voice. And I'm being right now on the state level, like the task force, I'm doing the work, right? I'm doing a lot of work, but yet I wasn't chosen to be on this task force and I'm directly dealing with social equity applicants. That's a barrier. Those are issues that we all need to come together and be like, well, why isn't she at the table when she's directly dealing with social equity applicants? These things are the type of things that need to not happen and should not happen, not in 2020. I don't need no accolades because I'm gonna continue to do the work, period, because it's what's needed and what must happen. And so the question was,
period. Okay.
Period. No, the question you were asking me, bring me back. I'm sorry.
Your Cannabis Equity Act. Jewell has to leave in a few minutes, so I just wanted you to get an opportunity so y'all could dialogue a little bit about it and that you can educate our audience as well.
So, okay, that hit back on kind of what Chris was saying was, you know, once it goes federal, we need something in place. And what we need in place is an act. We need a Social Equity Cannabis Act, period. And that would define some of the things and head off some of the things that we are experiencing now and what we're going to be experiencing in the future. So right now we have a change.org site up where we have like a 14-point ask to state representatives, and it also goes to city council people once a person signs the petition. And some of the things that are in that act is ensuring that there are identified 11 cities in Michigan that are majority Black that should have social equity programs and that should have resources, have tools in order to succeed and improve economically. I can't remember offhand like all of the 14 points, but a lot of it has to deal with what we need on a state level. This puts pressures on city council members to be able to ensure, again, that their residents participate. They stay in the city, the state treats Detroit so terribly. I mean, absolutely terribly. And I'm watching it firsthand how, like, there's no way that Detroit, which is the biggest city in this state, can't get resources in order for those who have been harmed by war on drugs and by marijuana can't get any resources or tools. That's just incredible to me. But we're talking about poverty and we're talking about crime, but these are things that are solutions to poverty and crime. So I would be more than happy. I would love to be able to have that sit down and go over these 14 points with whomever so we can get it done.
What I'll do too, and I appreciate that, I'll share my information in the chat as well. So anyone that would like to connect, please do. Don't forget I work for you, so you're my boss. So.
Hey, Najanabi, you're muted.
I'm sorry. I was doing a lot of talking too. Okay. I was asking Mitzi if you could drop your change.org link so that the panelists, as well as we can put it out on Facebook so that people can read over the 14 points.
Can I go back to something that Burton talked about, Brother Brown, and it kind of ties into what Mitzi's working on as well. I think the change.org, those essentially chain letters, those help get the information out. But going back to what Brother Brown said, engaging your legislators, that is extremely important. That's where I believe that you're going to start seeing a lot more movement in this industry for African Americans. And I'll tell you this as a legislator. So no matter what the issue is, there's always some group or some individual or entity who's trying to lobby me to do this or do that. Now, it's up to me, of course, to listen. It's up to me to decide if this is just noise or if this is actually going to help people. But absent of engagement and knowing each other one-on-one, or at least having that connectivity, and not necessarily in a confrontational way, because it's not, the things that are happening and not happening aren't necessarily that person's a fault. What we've got to do is build this bridge of understanding, build political power. Also, that may mean putting money behind a candidate who's going to push your issues. This is how, unfortunately, for some folks, they think this is how the game works. And it's not really a game. This is how you move one piece to the next piece. You may not have an opportunity to always directly talk to that individual one-on-one, person to person, but your group can. So working collectively, we see all of these folks of color on this call. This is imperative. Let's get together and do something, not just talk about it, but really put some weight behind the political aspect of this issue. Because, again, we talk about it all day long, but if you don't have that political pressure on folks like us, sometimes it won't work. And I'll say this, when it comes to the just blanket letters that, someone will just sign, I don't know about the state, but when it comes to council, it gets lost. They get lost. But when you actually have and try to build a relationship, and that doesn't mean that you have to always buy into what that legislator says and does. You need to challenge them, challenge us. But having an understanding of what that person is and is not doing, that gives you the ability to know where and how you should push them in the direction that you want to do. But I still think that what Missy's doing with that change.org initiative, I think it is valid and it's helpful because it still spreads the information to individuals who typically wouldn't have it. But I absolutely believe that it's imperative to start flexing political muscle.
Najanabi, you are still muted, sis.
I have one last question about, we've talked about how to get people in the game, how to legalize it, how we would like to see it regulated. Devontae, as well as Burton, if you guys could talk a little bit about how to stay IRS compliant once you get there, because we've seen so many of our people, once they start getting into businesses, this is the hard part for them. So if you guys could talk a little bit about that, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I say just become really familiar with the 280E and 471C. So 471 is kind of like a loophole. You can deduct business expenses if it's attached to the cost of selling the product or manufacturing the product. So I say really get familiar with that in that aspect so you can be ready. Because I mean, more often than not, businesses get audited by the IRS. So you have all your I's dotted and T's crossed. You should be all good. Also, have a good accounting system in place from jump because later on down the line you may want to get some money from an investor. If you want to get some money from an investor, you may want to get or have on hand a review from another accountant or another CPA firm saying that this business is doing their accounting work according to the generally accepted accounting principles for the United States. So that's another thing you want to keep in mind too.
And he said two major keys right there. He said 280E, which is very important, so that you understand that's almost 85%, right, of retail sales. And then he talked about the loophole that allows you to basically write off some of your expenses. And honestly, again, the micro business is the only business. Again, this is why I'm big on it, that allows you to write off your grow and your processing operation while only being taxed on your provisioning operation. So you actually are not being taxed as much for one standalone property as opposed to the other licensees in the state of Michigan that are getting taxed like insanely, right? When you talk about federal excise tax. So he said the two, 470C and 280, those two taxes and mechanisms are very important, specifically to this industry.
So those are all of our questions for this evening. I want to give each of the panelists a moment to say something before they jump off. If there's anything that we missed or anything that you want to make sure that our audience knows about the cannabis industry, about Black equity, as well as decriminalization, this is your moment. I want to start with Burton Brown, since you were the last one we did the intro for.
I appreciate it. And the only reason why I'm so loud is because I'm literally driving. I don't know if you guys can hear me. But I think
yelling,
the biggest,
Burton. Shit.
my bad. But the biggest thing I really would like to leave with you all is, in order to be an owner in this industry, it's important that you focus on what you want to get out of the industry. And if you want to be an owner and you want to, experiment with plants, if you're a farmer, if you're doing if that's your space, then I think you should focus in the area of growing. But if you're looking at it from a financial aspect, you want to be profitable, and you have little income, please look at micros and understand that municipalities are going to have to be very, very strategic of how they work with these guys. If you look around the state, there's not a lot of, not any applicants for micros. There aren't any micro businesses open, and that's because it's not as profitable as the other industries, given the circumstance of how cities are zoning them. But with that said, we have to work with our officials, and we have to be clear when we are there that we want them to work for us. As Jewell said, he worked for you guys. So it's important that we support them, but it's important that we hold them accountable.
Yeah. Mike McCurdy?
Yeah, I just want to say, keep an eye on the Cannabis Caucus. We're working really hard to pressure Governor Whitmer to start signing some commutations for people. We really think it's important to start getting people let out. Justice deferred is justice denied. People are still rotting away. And on this equity stuff, everybody please reach out to the Cannabis Caucus if there's any way we can help with anything. We've got an executive committee with 14 activists on it who are, we have a lot of collective wisdom and want to help. We want to be helpful in all of your projects. So please reach out.
Yeah. Devontae?
I just want to say, if anyone's listening out there, if you have a skill that you can roll over into this, whether you're an attorney, you're good with logistics and supply chain, marketing, accounting, finance, or whatever, I say don't be afraid to jump into it, because you can be a trailblazer in this. And there's a shortage of, minorities professionals that provide those services in this industry. So I say, please give it a shot, or even just consider it. And I say everyone on this panel, if you know friends that are in that, that qualify with what I just said, just shoot that idea to them. The sky's the limit with this stuff, so go for it.
Yeah. Mitzi?
I want to say thanks again for the opportunity to have a voice with all of these great other panelists as well. Thank you all for the exchange. I want to say that Black Cannabis Access is just what it is. We're giving access. Check in. I do Sunday, every Sunday. I do informational, and just to have that conversation, talk about the laws, talk about any updates, and then you can familiarize yourself with the industry, and you can get familiar with what micro business is and the difference between the grows and what's on the table. So just check in on Sundays with me. At 12 o'clock, I talk about social equity. I run through it step by step, and then I go into the pathway to legal. And just like the gentleman before me said, this is an opportunity. It's a real opportunity, and it's a cash business. This plant has so many opportunities in it. Just jump in and just start familiarizing yourself. Check in, network, and really, it is really still on the ground floor. To be honest, it really is. It has not taken off where you can't see owners of dispensaries, or you can't see owners of retail shops. I mean, Chris is right here. You know what I mean? You are still had an opportunity to really tap in, touch these people, and really get some insight, questions, and answers. So again, I thank you all for the opportunity. Go to my website, Black Cannabis Access. We are here to help and take you all step by step.
Chris?
Mitzi, is that a .org, .com?
.com.
Okay. Thank you for sharing, sis. Always a pleasure to be in your presence.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity.
Jeez, that's the praise that I think we all want one day.
Well, I've been enjoying Mitzi for years now.
Yeah, that's all good. It's all good.
See your face again.
I'm here to work for it. It's cool. I gotta work to get it. I get it. No, let me say, shout out to Detroit Force, man, for Force Detroit, for like doing what you guys do, right? Like creating the platform where we have an opportunity to speak our truth, and that our folks can hear it, man, because again, like media, access to media, controlling that narrative, it matters, right? And so having our own media outlet to be able to have these types of discussions is an important thing. So thank everybody on the call for their perspective too. I'd say, without echoing things that other people have said, the cannabis industry, if we do our job, right, and we trailblaze in whatever way we have an opportunity in trailblazing, I think there's an opportunity to use what we do in an infant industry like cannabis, and I've said it before, but just replicate it to other industries like healthcare, education, real estate, right? Like all of those things where we have issues in equity. If we can get it right in this industry, and we're working on doing it, I think everybody on the call is, and we've been successful, but we got a lot of work to do. But if we can replicate, transition that energy or whatever we accomplish here into the other industries, I think we start to see things turn around from equitable perspective from all of the ones that I mentioned that we traditionally as Black people may not have fair, equitable access to. And so appreciate the opportunity, and I am available to answer questions and help however I need.
Can you drop your information as well? And then we're going to swing over to Councilman James Tate.
All right, yes, sure. Thank you, Force Detroit, for inviting me, allowing me to come and share and learn as well. Really appreciate this this opportunity. I just want to let folks know that the ordinance that we have that we're working on, the recreational marijuana ordinance, is the moratorium was extended to October 31st, and we are well on track to being able to have a ordinance that is before council and prayerfully passed by October 31st. So I wanted to let folks know that for sure. As a matter of fact, we have a meeting tomorrow to deal with the next aspect of where we are in the process. If anything that I've learned, you don't always have to be super involved in the cannabis industry to have a compassion for the people who can benefit from it. That's where I sit right now. if you're in the industry, you want to get in the industry, as I indicated, I get numerous calls and emails on a regular basis. Make sure you learn your stuff now, because once we flip that switch, I'm not going to say it's going to be too late, but it's going to be extremely difficult. It's going to be much more difficult to get in the game the way you want to at that point if you're learning, starting to learn at that juncture. So as much as you can learn right now, all these folks who are on this call, make sure you reach out to them. I mean, Chris Jackson, you just heard all the great information he provided. You just heard all the information that BERTON provided as well. Mitzi, these are folks who are available to you to reach out and just ask a question. Do whatever you can to work collaboratively. And once you learn and get that information and you're in the industry or even working to get into the industry, don't be afraid to reach out to your legislators. Matter of fact, that's going to have to be your duty to reach out to the legislators to push us to do what is necessary to move the next phase of wherever we're going in this industry to that next level. And that should not be guided by elected officials. It should be guided by the people who are on this call and people who are looking to get into this industry. So don't allow people like me to just make all the rules to move forward. I'll tell you this, Mitzi and I, a couple of years ago, we were on different sides of this argument. But because we realized that we had the same goal, maybe the way we went about it was different, but we had the same goal. So we sat down and understood and realized that we're stronger together. And everybody who's watching this video right now, understand that you're stronger working with someone than trying to do this by yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to thank everybody who was able to join us today. A lot of us have had long conversations, starting with, I remember calling Councilman Tate in 2018 after I went to Oakland and experienced that program. I was like, why we don't have that here? He's like, it just doesn't work. And we had an hour conversation that day too. You know, these are hard conversations. And for me, my fear is always that our people will get left behind in our own communities. So I feel like it's important that we all take responsibility for what's going on in our communities. And if your elected officials aren't answering you, please call me. I sit on the Cannabis Caucus. I often put pressure on political, on the people who represent me or the people who represent the state or the people who represent you. And you know, it's our job to do that. If we're not advocating for you, we're also elected at the Cannabis Caucus. Councilman James Tate is elected. Senator Marshall Bullock, who came on, is elected. Aiyash, he's up for election this year, and Jewell Jones. They're all elected officials, which, like they said, that means they work for us, and that if the laws aren't representative of things that actually impact us, we need to make sure that we're making our voices known. It shouldn't be something where it's getting to Senate and now we're complaining because we didn't know that it was there. You know, like, these things aren't a secret. They're public knowledge, and if you don't know it, reach out to someone like a Chris, like a Mitzi, like a BERTON, like a me, like a Devontae, and we want to bridge those. We want to bridge those gaps.
Thank you all for joining. Grateful for all of your voices. We'll be in touch.
Peace and love.
Thank you.
Thank you.